I'm Bob Short. This is Reflections on Georgia Politics, sponsored by the Richard B. Russell Library for Political Research and Studies at the University of Georgia and Young Harris College. It's Friday, August 29th, 2014, and we're on the campus of Young Harris College for a visit with Georgia Senator Johnny Isakson. Thank you, Senator Isakson, for being with us today.
Good to be with you, Bob.
Thank you. You spent your vacation on a series of town hall meetings around the state to hear from your constituents. What are they saying?
They're mad and they're frustrated and they're concerned. Terrorism has risen its ugly head again in the Middle East. ISIS is now the ultimate manifestation of what Al-Qaeda started and what Osama bin Laden wanted to do. They're the biggest threat, not just to the United States of America, but really to all the world, because they're growing. They're colonizing, if you will, in states that have, in countries that have visa waiver to get passports, to get easier entry to the United States. And as you know, Bob, terrorism only has to get it right once. They don't win a war by taking territory and capturing towns and winning battles. They scare you so you cower at home and you change your way of life, and that's what they're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Which brings up Homeland Security. Our Homeland Security Agency is charged with the responsibility of protecting us. Are we really safer today than we were before 9/11?
Absolutely. The difference in now and 9/11 is really pretty simple. 9/11/2001, 19 Muslim fundamental terrorists with driver's licenses and cell phones conducted an attack against America, which is the largest loss of life in history, even bigger than Pearl Harbor. The reason was our intelligence agents were paper and pencil agents at the time. We weren't digital, we weren't cellular, we weren't technology driven, and we got snuck back past by a bunch of people who were. So we changed our whole method of operation. We passed the Patriot Act, we created the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Courts, we created a mechanism to protect the constitutional rights of Americans, to protect them from illegal search and seizure, but at the same time have a way to take digital technology, cellular technology, and the day of the internet, and be able to intercept in real time those communications without violating the constitutional rights of American citizens.
Let's talk a bit about federal spending and taxing. What, if anything, can be done to balance the budget?
Same thing you do at home. You do it out of necessity. The problem is Congress doesn't have a governor. I made a speech with a bunch of legislators in Mercer last Saturday afternoon. I said, you know, the advantage the Georgia legislature has over the United States House and Senate, the Georgia Constitution prohibits deficit spending. The U.S. Constitution is silent. Without a governor, like a constitutional amendment to balance the budget, it is too tempting to buy votes with promises or infrastructure or particular benefits one way or another to a community, and we don't have the enforced discipline, the mechanism to just say no. And because of that, for the better part of the last half of the 20th century, Congress never did say no. In fact, if you look at the last 4 or 5 presidencies, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, and Obama, only in 2 years of the Clinton administration was there a surplus. All the other years there was a deficit of some type, and in some of those years a deficit larger than $1 trillion.
Mm-hmm. Well, we all know that you can't cut spending without reducing entitlements. If it gets to that, which entitlements are fair game?
If all of them aren't fair game, then you're in trouble, because all of them play a part in deficit spending. About 1/3 of the federal budget is discretionary spending. About 2/3 of it is on cruise control. You've got Medicare, you got Medicaid, you got Social Security, you got SSI disability, you got federal retirement, state retirement, military retirement, AFDC, and a plethora of benefit programs like food stamps. They're all formula driven, not legislatively accountable. We've got to open all those up and decide to put a means test on them, a cost benefit analysis, to make sure they're done right. Now, Bob, let's take Johnny Isakson as an example. In 1986, I was 39 years old. Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill got together and they decided they were going to fix Social Security because it was going broke. So they passed a law that said anybody born after 1943 can't get Social Security at age 65. They have to wait till 66. I was born in 44. So in 1986, they took away 1 year of my Social Security. Did I miss it? I wasn't sure I'd live to 65 years old anyway. And my dad would always tell me the government was going to screw it up, so it probably wasn't going to be there anyway. So it didn't bother me. And when I got to be 65, I didn't miss the payment because I didn't anticipate it. What we need to do is push out eligibility for my children and my grandchildren. It goes to 67 in a couple years. By the time my grandchildren, the youngest of which is 4 or 5 years old, is 70 years old, it probably ought to be 70. Everybody has paid for Social Security and they deserve to receive it. But it needs to be driven in an actuarially sound method and sound methodology. Same thing's true with Medicare. I've paid $1.35 a hundred or 1.35% of my income since 1968 for Medicare. You have too, and so has every other American. But quite frankly, Medicare is going to break the country. It's a fee-for-service reimbursement business with no cap, no capitation whatsoever. So what we're going to have to do is means test it. You know, should Johnny Isakson get the same benefit that the poorest Georgian should? No. Poorest Georgian deserves an opportunity to have health care too, in terms of their latter years. So what you do is something like what Vice Presidential candidate Paul Ryan did in his proposal. You means test through premium support. I get my Medicare benefit in a supportive payment towards a Medicare insurance policy. It's a premium support payment, it's not a reimbursement to a doctor. That way you can control the government cost, you can manage the benefit, and you can still ensure people they'll get a health care benefit for the money they paid. That's a tough thing to do, but if we don't do the tough things, we're going to be broke, we're going to be a second-class country, and inflation's going to take over everybody, the value of everybody's assets, and they're going to decline.
While we're on that subject, what are the chances of the Isakson-Shaheen Budget and Appropriations Act passing the Congress?
It's getting better. We had a test vote this past year where we got almost 2/3 of the Senate to vote for it, including one of the two chairs of the Budget Committee, which was a real move forward. It's a real simple concept. It's one step short of a balanced budget. It just says you appropriate for 2 years, not 1 year, to give certainty and predictability. And you appropriate in odd-numbered years so that in election years, which is every even-numbered year, you're doing oversight and accountability rather than spending money. The problem with Congress is we never look back. We do what's called continuation budgeting. We take everything we've done in the past and we continue it, and then we add on to it. You know as well as I do that's a recipe for failure, and that's why we're in the deficit problem we're in today.
We often hear talk about rewriting our federal tax code. What's going on there?
What's going on there is we're getting caught literally with our pants down as a country. We're non-competitive in terms of our tax code. There are only 3 countries left in the world that don't have a territorial tax system, meaning you only tax the income that's earned on your shores. If Coca-Cola makes money in America, they pay taxes. They pay 35%. But if they go to India, they pay taxes in India. But our code says if you bring that money back from India into the United States, you pay taxes again. So what happens? You have offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands and other places. The money doesn't come back in our country. So we don't have as much capital investment and cash flow as we should. Secondly, we got the highest tax rate in the world. Japan has finally moved below us. We're at 35% corporate tax on C corporations, which are stock companies. But there's another interesting factor. Less people are employed by stock companies, C corps, than are employed by S corps, which are family businesses, LLCs, and things like that. What we need is a comprehensive reform of all the tax code, put all the gimmicks we've put into it for the last 27 or 28 years, means test every one of them on a cost-benefit basis, and if they're costing the American government more than they're benefiting the American people, you repeal the deduction, you take the revenue that brings about, and you buy down the tax rate so you're more competitive at rate, and you're less confusing in terms of tax code. Whenever I do a town hall and I say, raise your hand if you like doing your taxes, no, everybody raises their hand and says, no, I don't like doing my taxes. And I say, raise your hand if you do your taxes. None of them do. They have to get accountants. They have to get somebody to do it for them because it's so complicated and complex. We need to simplify the code, get out a lot of the tricks and the gimmicks, take the revenue that generates, buy down the rate, and have a fairer, flatter system for the American people.
Will that ever happen?
It's going to happen because what's happening with corporate inversions. Just this past week, Burger King bought a donut company in Canada to move their headquarters to Canada. Because in Canada, the top rate for C Corps is 15%, in America it's 35%. That's a 20% less tax break, so they moved to Canada. We don't want America's greatest companies moving. We don't want Coca-Cola on North Avenue just near the Georgia Tech campus. World headquarters deciding they want to go to New Delhi because the tax code's better. We want them to stay in America because it's competitive and it's fair.
Well, Senator, as you know, the debate over health care continues. You said that the president's approach will unravel, was your word, in 3 years. If it does, what happens then?
Well, like all ideas, even bad ideas, which the Affordable Care was, have some meritorious parts to it. The reason I use the word unravel is the pieces of it that don't work ought to be pulled out. But part of that fabric does work. The elimination of discrimination because of pre-existing condition was a great benefit that the Affordable Care Act brought about. And by doing it on a nationwide act, you created a risk pool that was able to absorb that risk so it didn't break the insurance industry. Allowing kids up to the age of 26 to stay on their parents' policy as long as they were in school at home, that was actually lowered the cost of insurance because kids don't get sick. They help bring down the cost. Those were two things we ought to continue. But centrally managed health care by the government is wrong. The Affordable Care Act is driving doctors to sell their practices to hospitals because of the risk, the paperwork, and the liability. It's driving hospitals to become bigger and bigger. It's driving a lot of providers out of the business. It's reducing the number of people who want to become physicians and physician's assistants and things like that. It's really hurt the healthcare system. So what we need to do is unravel those pieces that constrain private competition in the private delivery of healthcare, create a more competitive environment for healthcare, preserve the benefits that were added that make sense, and go about the business of doing what we've always done, yielding to the private sector and the average American entrepreneur, whether he's a physician or whatever he may do. That will be the solution for the unraveling of healthcare.
Can we get enough bipartisanship in Congress to do that?
You know, if you watch TVs on Sundays and watch all the TV Sunday shows, you see the same 10 members of Congress calling each other names and arguing. You don't see the 90% of Congress that's trying to do a good job. This past year, I've had the opportunity to work with Patty Murray, who's the chairman of the Democratic Caucus, on a bill that was the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. I worked with Bob Menendez from New Jersey on the reform of federal flood insurance to help our coastal area down in Brunswick and Glenn County. You can find common ground anywhere if you're just willing to sit down and look for that 80% that matches and fits and not fight over the 20% you don't agree on. We need a little more consensus, common sense in the Congress. What brings that about is the ballot box. If the people will turn out those who are so caustic and so antagonistic at each other and elect people who are willing to sit down at the table and work, we'll have a more effective Congress and less partisan government, and that will be good for the entire country.
Our so-called middle class has become a hot political issue this election year. Is middle America really getting the shaft, as we keep hearing?
Middle America is carrying the burden of the American people and the American government. They're paying the taxes, they're working and they're bearing a terrible burden to pay for the benefit programs and the entitlement programs you talked about earlier. So they're under stress and duress. They also have become a target of political advisors in political campaigns. In fact, the Romney campaign got attacked for being the 47%, if you remember, in the presidential election a few years ago. Other people are categorizing people in other ways. So they're being categorized for political purposes, but they're not, this middle class is not shrinking, it's just under duress. We need to expand the middle class to make it better and bigger.
Immigration is a divisive issue. How do you think we should deal with the current problem of immigration?
We should honor the legal immigration process, and we should fix the broken enforcement of the illegal immigration process, and we should reform our immigration laws. Bob, my grandfather, Anders Bingston, came to the United States in 1903 from Sweden during the potato famine. He was a naturalized citizen May the 24th, 1926. My dad was born here in America. That's why I'm a birthright citizen. My grandfather did it the right way. He came through Ellis Island. He worked hard. He became a citizen through naturalization. We ought to have that goal for everybody, and we ought to have that mechanism for everybody. But he came legally because to come illegally didn't work. But what's happened on our southwestern border is the country of Mexico lends us no support whatsoever in enforcing their side of the border. We don't have the manpower, or we don't have the political will in Washington, primarily with the current president, to enforce the border that we have on the south. So what's happening is you have a flood of people getting across the border coming to America. In my speeches, I have a line that I always use. You don't find anybody trying to break out of the United States of America. They're all trying to break in. It's still the land of opportunity. It's still the greatest country on the face of this earth. But it's a great country because it's a country of discipline. It's a country of immigrants. It's a country of entrepreneurship and a free enterprise system. But if we don't enforce the flood of immigration and stop the flood of immigration coming in the country, it neutralizes our benefit programs, it neutralizes the security of our country, and it's not good for us. The 19 hijackers on 9/11/2001 all came on forged visas, all came by getting driver's licenses in the United States. We've got to make it harder to get in this country and harder to get in here illegally, so we enforce the law for those that want to come here and be naturalized citizens. The pathway to citizenship ought to be through legalization and through legal entry. It ought not be through coming under the back door.
I'm sure on your tour you're hearing complaints about the cost of gasoline. What, if anything, should our federal government do today to provide relief from high cost of gas?
Well, first of all, I'm not hearing about the cost of gasoline for this reason. It's come down over the last 4 years. This Labor Day will be the lowest average cost per gallon in the last 4 years, so people don't have that on their mind. What I am hearing is, why can't we get the natural gas we've now discovered in Haynesville and Marcellus Shale out of the ground because the president won't let us frack? And why can't we build the Keystone Pipeline from Canada to Houston, Texas, to bring the tar sands oil from Canada to America? America has gone from the 1970s, when we were energy dependent. We waited in line for hours to get $10 worth of gas, which was our ration for the week. And you remember those days, and I do too. We now are a net exporter of energy because of our natural gas, because our nuclear energy has grown, because we've invested in biomass and solar technology, wind technology like that, but also because we're exploring and bringing oil out of the ground in the United States and offshore. We've got to continue to do that. We need the soft power of energy independence to move our country forward, and we need the administration in Washington. President Obama is the only American that hadn't signed off on the Keystone Pipeline. The State Department did, the Environmental Protection Agency has, Fish and Wildlife have, everybody has. And think about this, Bob. A pipeline doesn't generate 1 ounce of carbon into the atmosphere because that oil is flowing underground in a pipe. If you bring it from Canada by truck, those trucks emit diesel fuel and carbon, which it does pollute the air. So I don't understand any reasoning behind the president's reluctance to sign it except the politics of environmentalism at the extreme. And America's losing anytime extreme environmentalism is making our political decisions.
Well, there seems to be a lot of concern about fracking causing earthquakes. Is there any scientific evidence to show that's true?
We've been fracking for 30 years, and nobody's blamed an earthquake on fracking yet. Fracking is the process of putting liquid under high pressure, steam primarily, into the shale to force out the natural gas and open it up. Now, it is true there are environmentally dangerous ways to frack if you don't make sure that what you're putting in there under high pressure is sound water, sound clean water, and you don't put chemicals in that water that could pollute the groundwater. That would be a problem. But we haven't done it in 30 to 35 years, and we're not going to do it now. We have gone from a country that thought we were out of natural gas to a country that now has reserves that even the greatest of scientists say is an infinite supply of gas. We have more natural gas than we have coal, and we thought we had enough coal to burn forever. We need to take that resource and we need to use it as soft power around the world. I, for one, believe, and right now, as you know, the Russians have invaded Ukraine. They're holding the Ukraine and Crimea literally hostage, and you know why? Because the Ukraine and Crimea are dependent on Russia for natural gas and oil. If America would get our natural gas out of the Haynesville and Marcellus Shale and export it to the Ukraine, we could replace the Russians as a supplier of energy and take away their biggest asset. We could take the pressure off Germany that depends on Russia. We need to be a world player in energy and not a country that becomes dependent again because we restrict our own ability to improve our own resources.
Let's talk for a minute about foreign affairs. It seems when we wake up every morning, there's an outbreak of violence somewhere in the world. Are we doing all we can to keep peace?
We have vacated voluntarily our position as a world leader lately. A year ago, when the president decided not to take action in Syria when Assad crossed the imaginary red line the president had drawn, we sent the message to the world that our word was not necessarily our bond. We have not done anything through our NATO partners on the Ukrainian issue to try and put pressure except for sanctions on Russia. We have a situation now where ISIS is running rampant in the Middle East. The Iraq that we won on the battlefield, that became an independent democracy and a self-determined constitutional government, is now lost because we abandoned that country. I'm going to tell you something, Bob. History is a great teacher. In South Korea, in Germany, and in Japan, when we won those wars, we left a contingency of American troops to protect and preserve the peace and tranquility initially, but also in the long term to protect the investment of the American people in winning those countries. We should have done the same thing in Iraq. We left all our assets and now they're being used against us by ISIS. Afghanistan's coming up on July the 14th of next year as the deadline. President Obama has said he's going to withdraw all troops from Afghanistan. If he does, that vacuum will be filled by ISIS again, and we will have wasted the blood and treasure and the investment of taxpayer money in winning two decisive victories for peace, independence, freedom, and liberty and democracy in two dangerous parts of the world. We need to assert ourselves as a leader. Colin Powell, in his speech to the UN, when President Bush was asking for a UN resolution in support of going into Iraq, made the following statement. America, for over two centuries, has sent her sons and daughters in harm's way on all continents of the world to fight for liberty, peace, and freedom, and has never asked for a single thing when we left except a couple acres of ground to bury our dead. We are not a colonistic country. We don't want to go colonize anybody. We don't want to bring them under us. All we want to do is give them the right to self-determine their future and to live freely. That's everything totalitarianism is against, but it's everything America is for. We need to reassert ourselves as the world leader for democracy, for peace, and for freedom. People need to know where America stands, and when we draw red lines and somebody crosses them, there needs to be a consequence. If there isn't, we're just a paper tiger.
Common Core.
Bad brand. Common Core is a set of common standards that 45 of the 50 governors of the United States determined everybody ought to be able to meet by graduating from high school in their states. You know, we have 50 independent states. The state's principal responsibility is to run public education and educate their citizens. And people move around in the United States. Military personnel move from base to base. There was a desire to bring about some standardization of the objectives and the goals of the curriculum of public education. And it was called Common Core, and 45 of the 50 states adopted it. It was not a federally driven program. Some people began to find some things they didn't like about Common Core, so Common Core became a common enemy. It became a buzzword, like terrorism or some bad brand. Common Core is nothing more than the governors of the country coming together saying, shouldn't we have standards that are equal across the board so that when somebody moves from one part of the country to another in our public education system, they're achieving at a level that was predictable and was laid out and was curriculum driven by a common set of values and a common set of standards. But it's become top-down government. It's become blamed on being top-down education, which it's not. And it's under a lot of controversy right now, and a number of states are withdrawing from it. Our governor has done the responsible thing. He's called for congressional hearings in all the congressional districts with parents and educators to determine if Common Core is what they want to do and engage the public with it. That's what needs to be done. But in the end, it's basically been called a federal down mandate on standards in education, which is totally wrong because it was a bottom-up request for a mandate that the states consolidated to want to have.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the other things that are on the minds of your constituency here in Georgia?
You know, Bob, we've got some of the biggest military bases in the United States of America. All of the infantry trains in America, either at Fort Stewart or Fort Benning. All airborne in every branch of the service trains at Fort Benning. One of the 3 air logistics centers in the world is located at Robins Air Force Base. The largest reserve base, air reserve base in the world is at Dobbins. Moody Air Force Base in Valdosta is critical. The East Coast, our Camden Bay nuclear subbase is the big nuclear subbase for Trident subs on the East Coast of the United States. Georgia is married to the military and is a huge part of the military's platform to launch around the world. Because of the scandal that took place in the Veterans Administration in terms of VA health care, I've spent the entire month as I've traveled the state going to VA clinics and VA hospitals, American Legion posts for town hall meetings, meeting with people in the VA to try and root out the problems and try and get a course set at VA to deliver a better quality of health care and a more responsible delivery of that health care to veterans. In fairness to the VA, its healthcare system is basically fine in terms of the product it delivers. What's wrong with it is it's a monolithic, government centrally controlled healthcare system that became lazy and actually falsified some documents in some cases to motivate some of their people to seek raises and advance competition. And some of that result of that was a slowing down of making appointments for veterans, or in some cases, canceling appointments for veterans that veterans needed to have. And in the case of Georgia, and one sad case in Augusta, Georgia, we had 3 deaths for people who were referred for colonostomies, but because their appointments were canceled by a bureaucrat within the VA, the colonoscopy was never done. The person died of colon cancer, and that's the bad result. So we're traveling the state, trying to illuminate the problems at VA, trying to elevate VA to fix those problems, and then try and move forward to deliver to those who delivered for us the best health care we can to our veterans who served in harm's way.
You played a major role in the funding of our port in Savannah.
Well, I got lucky. Luck is when opportunity meets preparation. I'd been prepared all along to try and force the president and the administration's hand and OMB's hand to try and finally put the money in the budget for the Port of Savannah. But we never quite had the lever. But being on the Finance Committee and the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee, I had the opportunity to be in on the confirmation of Sylvia Burwell twice. Sylvia Burwell was moving from OMB to be Secretary of Labor HHS to replace Kathleen Sebelius. So I had 2 chances in committee to determine her future. In the first one in hearing, I told her in the Health Committee, I said her appointment may be important to her, but her appointment was not as important to me as the Port of Savannah being funded. OMB was holding it up. I was not going to let her move forward in her process until we got the Port of Savannah straightened out. Quite frankly, and Joan Kirchner, who's my chief of staff, will tell you, before I got back from that public hearing, or that confirmation hearing, the phone was ringing in our office. The lawyers at OMB were asking to meet with us in a couple of days, and they did, and we worked out the difficulties. We worked out the differences of opinion we had. OMB agreed to move forward and give the Corps of Engineers the authorization to negotiate the project partnership agreement. And a week later, when we did the confirmation in the Finance Committee, I was publicly able to acknowledge that Sylvia Burwell had caused to happen what I'd asked to happen a week before at our other confirmation hearing. And now we're fortunately have $706 million authorization for the deepening and widening of the channel and the deepening of the Port of Savannah, which will be a godsend for our country in terms of trade, but great for our state. That port generates 297,000 jobs in Georgia. It will grow by another 100,000 jobs because of the deepening. The largest ships in the world, when they come through the Panama Canal, will now come to the Port of Savannah in Georgia.
When will that begin, and how long will it take?
It'll begin in the next few months, and it'll take 5 years. Mm-hmm. To dredge a port and to dredge a channel and leave it open at the same time to shipping is an engineering challenge of great proportion. Water being fluid as it is, silt being fluid as it is, the systems to do that are complicated. And the environmental mitigation for oxygenation of the water and for the fish and wildlife is also a tremendous amount of time. And then we're having to build a ladder for fish in Augusta. You know, the Savannah River, it goes through Augusta to Savannah, Georgia. And we've got a fish that's endangered at the Savannah River Lock and Dam, the Augusta Lock and Dam on the Savannah River. So we're going to build a fish ladder up that dam so those fish can continue to migrate even after the Port of Savannah is deepened. So we're taking care of the fish, the oxygen, the air, but we're taking care of the economy of Georgia by expanding that port and making it bigger and making it better.
Were there other federal projects that you were interested in for Georgia?
There always are federal projects that we're interested in. We're primarily interested now, if we want to move from the Port of Savannah to the Highway Trust Fund, which is broken. The Highway Trust Fund for years has been a major source of cash to build the interstate highway system, to meet the transportation improvement plans of regional areas, to be part of the federal-state partnership in building transportation. But the Highway Trust Fund is broken. We were talking about gas prices earlier. The trust fund has been funded historically by a fixed number of cents per gallon charge on consumption of gasoline and diesel fuel. What's been happening since we raised CAFE standards in the 90s and early 2000s, cars are going from getting 18 miles a gallon to getting 35 or 40 miles to a gallon. which means a gallon of gas takes you 2 or 3 times as far as it used to. It also means you're getting a third less revenue for more miles traveled. That's a broken system. The revenue needs to move with the miles traveled so you can have the obsolescence of the roads managed all the time and fix them and patch them up and maintain them. So we've got to change that paradigm so that we can meet the challenges of the 21st century. If we don't, we'll become a second-class economy again around the world. We've got to find a new way to fund transportation. And it's got to be based on the old principle of user pays. That's the way we do our airlines, that's the way we do aviation, that's the way we do shipping. It's also the way we ought to do highways.
Let's talk for a minute about Johnny Isakson.
That'll be a short subject.
10 years as a United States Senator, facing re-election in 2016. You've said you're a candidate. Question mark.
There's no equivocation in my candidacy. I've got a campaign manager ready to go. Never closed my campaign office from 2012. I have my finance director in place. I spent most of the month of August going to most of the cities and counties in Georgia, certainly a lot of them, doing my job and letting people know of my love for the state of Georgia and the appreciation I have for the job that I have. The Lord's blessed me with good health. I've got the energy to do it. I've got the desire to do it. And I've got a great wife who's willing to let me do it and support me in doing it. So we're going to take on all comers and all challengers. In the end, it's what's best for Georgia. I'll leave that to the voters, but they're going to have me to choose from. Whomever else wants to run can pay their money and take their chances.
Anything else on your bucket list?
Well, I think I want to, if that's the closing question to the interview, I want to take us back full circle to where we started. We started talking about the threat of terrorism and ISIS and what's going on in the Middle East. Bob, every American generation has faced its enemy. My father's generation had to face Hitler, and the greatest generation defeated Hitler and won World War II. We've had Vietnam, we've had the Korean War, we had World War I, we've had conflicts all the way through our history. We have never had one as deadly or as dangerous as ISIS. I repeat what I said earlier. They only have to get it right once. They only have to win by having you cower in fear of going out and getting on an airplane or getting in your car or going to a stadium. They've won when they get you afraid to move. And that's why it's so dangerous, and that's why what ISIS is doing in the Middle East is growing and scares me to death. We have to go after ISIS. We have to destroy ISIS. You cannot negotiate with a terrorist. Someone who will take their life in order to take yours is not somebody that understands negotiations, constitutions, or democracy. They only understand one thing, and that's force, and we got to go after them and we got to go get them.
Well, Senator, you've always made good common and political sense. Any chance you might someday add President of the United States to your bucket list?
You know, there are a lot of things in life that aren't certain, but the answer to that question is absolutely certain, no. You've heard of the Peter Principle, being promoted to a level of incompetence. That would be my Peter Principle level. I think I'm at my peak apex right now, and I love what I'm doing.
Okay, we are now down to the final question. Have we missed anything?
I'm sure we have, but you did a great job of covering a lot of stuff. I guess as I think back over the trip, a couple things that we didn't talk about that I would like to mention. One is I held two of my 10 town halls at extensions of the University of Georgia. It's a great university. The reach of the university is great. And I was at Griffin, Georgia, at the university's extension there the other day, had a great town hall meeting where they're doing a lot of agricultural experimentation and agricultural development in terms of turf grasses and things like that. Going to be in Athens, Georgia. Well, I'm going to be watching the Bulldogs on my television tomorrow night when they play Clemson in Athens, Georgia, pulling for them. Had the pleasure of meeting with Jerry Moorhead when we were down at Griffin. We have a great university system. I've been at other universities that are part of our great system. But I want to end by saying this. The unkept secret, the best kept secret of the state of Georgia is our adult and technical education system, which is the best in the world. When I went down to NCR in Columbus for a meeting with them, they talked about how the decision to come to Georgia from Ohio was because of our Quick Start program and our ability to train their workforce. When I went to Meggitt in Duluth the other day, an arms company that manufactures systems to train people in terms of warfare, the Quick Start system supplies their workers. When I went to Anheuser-Busch in Bartow County, the first thing they said is thank you for the Quick Start program. Our educational system in terms of higher education, whether it's technical or whether it's university level, is second to none in the country.
Well, thank you, Senator Isakson, for visiting with us.
Thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure.